The Pentagon has stepped in to help relieve overcrowded border facilities by housing unaccompanied migrant children at U.S. Army bases. So far, 2 bases in Texas have been converted into makeshift shelters. That's Joint Base San Antonio and Fort Bliss near El Paso. It comes as the Biden administration scrambles to open 10 emergency influx housing facilities in addition to military bases. They're repurposing convention centers and camps for oil workers. Major General Michael T. McGuire is the Adjutant General for the Arizona National Guard. He's also the director of Arizona's Department of Emergency and Military Affairs. General, thanks very much for being with us. How did it end up that the Pentagon was called on to help find appropriate places to house migrant children? And is this commonplace?
Well, Elaine, thanks for having me on, and good afternoon. We received just a week ago a request here in the Arizona National Guard, as all of my colleagues did in other states and all of the active component military installation commanders did, to solicit where we may be able to have a certain amount of square footage, acreage, offset, and security to house children that are unaccompanied migrating across the border. To your question about whether this is unprecedented, in 2014, I was the emergency manager and adjutant general here in Arizona. We had a similar uptick in children, we believe, being trafficked and smuggled by cartel units from the Golden Triangle area. And we used 4 installations at that point: Lackland Air Force Base, Fort Sill, Aberdeen Proving Ground, and Point Mugu out in California. 2, as you mentioned, have already been cited, and based on at least predictions we're hearing from our partners at Customs and Border Protection, the number of installations could get even higher.
Well, what are the logistical challenges in transforming a military base to house children?
Well, I think the logistical challenges for the installations are that they have a partnership with Health and Human Services, which is what happened back in 2014 in the Obama administration. My role here in Arizona as the emergency manager is to make sure that we don't create another emergency on top of an emergency. And while the children need guardianship, and the military has the ability to accommodate Health and Human Services, it becomes a complex problem for logistics and sustainment. And here in Arizona, we've been battling a statewide COVID-19 emergency, and anything we add to the plate of our great service members that are out there makes it that much more complicated. But certainly they have the infrastructure to do it better equipped than any other federal entity.
So I do want to ask about that Watchdog report that uncovered multiple violations at an ICE detention facility in Eloy, Arizona during the final months of the Trump administration. You are already dealing with, as you said, taxed resources, but what's being done to prevent things like this from continuing?
Well, I think that's a great question, Elaine. As I mentioned before, Eloy, I can't speak specifically to what happened at Eloy. I would direct you to the Department of Homeland Security for that investigative report. But Eloy, like Gila Bend, recently here in Arizona, a small community of similar size to Eloy, Gila Bend, their city manager, Ms. Catherine Valenzuela, declared a citywide emergency for the fact that, separate and distinct from the children, we're dropping off undocumented immigrant family units in very small communities with either 16 or up to 30 at a time. And that creates tremendous pressure on temporary housing, medical treatment facilities, our ability to test them and to transport them to places where they could be properly accommodated. And I'm just asking that border security is really a human security issue as much as it is a national security issue. We've seen young kids get injured, being moved out, and unfortunately for 7 straight years, here in Arizona, our National Guardsmen have worked with Customs and Border Protection in the recovery of human bodies for people trying to make that very dangerous trek across our desert.
General, is the military housing migrants ultimately taking away from other critical duties?
HHS comes on as a tenant to the installations, and so they do the handling of the children, and the discharge and how we process, feed, and house them. But there does require a logistics and wraparound services bill that does have an impact on readiness to our units, setting aside the fact that we can't put our soldiers and airmen, sailors and Marines in these barracks if we're using them for children.
All of this in the middle of a pandemic. Major General Michael T. McGuire, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Elaine. You have a good afternoon.